Welcome to Management 2110's Chapter 11 lecture based on the readings from the textbook Management, 14th edition by Robbins Couter. So let's get started. First, we'll cover the learning objectives for Chapter 11. We're going to describe 6 key elements in organizational design. Then we're going to contrast mechanistic and organic structures. Then we're going to discuss the contingency factors that favor either the mechanistic model or the organic model of organizational design. Then we're going to describe traditional organizational design options. Then we're going to discuss organizing flexibility in the 21st century, develop your skill at acquiring and using power, and know how to stay connected and in the loop when working remotely. So the elements of organizational design. You have organizing as arranging and structuring work to accomplish organizational goals. It's an important process during which managers design an organization structure. Then you have organizational structure, and that is the formal arrangement of jobs within the organization. And then you have structure can be shown visually in an organizational chart. And when managers create or change the structure, they're engaged in organizational design. That's a process that involves decisions about 6 key elements, being work specialization, departmentalization, chain of command, span of control, centralization and decentralization, and formalization. So here we have Exhibit 11-1 covering the purposes of organizing. So some of the purposes of organizing include dividing work to be done into specific jobs and departments, assign tasks and responsibilities associated with individual jobs, coordinate diverse organizational tasks, cluster jobs into units, and establishing relationships among individuals, groups, and departments, establishing formal lines of authority, allocating and deploying organizational resources. These are all important elements. You think we went through the strategic planning, and then you break your strategy down into SMART objectives. Well, this is breaking it down even further, establishing all the rules of engagement, exactly what, all the moving parts are going to be doing, okay? Like taking clusters and then breaking them down to individual jobs, or units. Same thing with the cross-functional organizations, like spelling out who's doing what. Who's also going to be in charge, too, because although you may have some positional power, that's present, you may have a project manager from a cross-functional area that maybe will carry a little bit more power as a project manager when it comes down to the project alone. So all that's going to require establishing those lines of authority before the project ensues. So very important. So work specialization is dividing work activities into separate job tasks. Individual employees specializing, doing part of an activity rather than the entire activity in order to increase work output. Now it's also known as division of labor. The work specialization makes efficient use of the diversity, the worker skills. So tapping into everyone's talents. Early proponents of work specialization believed it could lead to increases in productivity, and at the beginning of the 20th century, that generalization was reasonable. Now, because specialization was not widely practiced, its introduction almost always generated higher productivity. But as Exhibit 11-2 illustrates, a good thing can be carried too far. At some point, the human diseconomies from the division of labor, being boredom, fatigue, stress, low productivity, poor quality, increased absenteeism, and high turnover rate exceed the economic advantages. Most managers today continue to see work specialization as important because it helps employees be more efficient. Now, at some point, however, work specialization no longer leads to productivity. Now, how jobs are grouped together is called departmentalization. Now, there's 5 common forms of departmentalization, and they're used, although an organization may develop its own unique classification. Now, Exhibit 11-3 on our next slide will illustrate each type of departmentalization as well as the advantages and disadvantages of each. And here we have Exhibit -3, and it illustrates the 5 common forms of departmentalization as well as the advantages and disadvantages, like I stated in the previous slide. Now, I'll leave this up for a few seconds for all you note takers. This is going to be a 3-slide series. Everybody should have gotten this by now. Now this is the second of 3. And this is the third. Now, another popular trend is the use of teams, especially as work tasks have become more complex and diverse skills are needed to accomplish those tasks. Now, one specific type of team that many organizations are using is a cross-functional team. I know you've heard me use this team or this cross-functional concept a lot in previous chapters. It's a work team composed of individuals from various functional specialties. This could be an array of breakdowns, different breakdowns. You could have a cross-functional project, that involves, let's say, involves construction, for example, and the land needs to be excavated first. So you'll have people who are involved in excavation, and even that can be broken down into cross-functional areas. Like you may have somebody who is going to deal with the tree removal before you even get into the excavation. And also it could be like a little bit broader too. You could have an organization that deals with productivity and wants to engage in a new product, and you may have the cross-functional experts at the table talking about the initiative, and the people in production require the people from accounting to be at the table, because the project's going to have to be funded, So it's individuals from various functional specialties who collectively work together, whether it's an initiative, a project, or a mission. Moving on. People need to know who their boss is. That's what the chain of command is all about. The chain of command is the line of authority extending from upper organizational levels to lower levels, which clarifies who reports to whom. Managers need to consider it when organizing work because it helps employees with questions such as, well, who do I report to? Or who do I go with? Who do I go to if I have a problem? And to understand the chain of command, you have to understand 3 other important concepts, and that's authority, responsibility, and the unity of command. So again, the chain of command is the line of authority extending from upper organizational levels to the lowest levels, which clarifies who reports to whom. Now, authority refers to the rights inherent in a managerial position to tell people what to do and what to expect them to do it, and to expect them to do it, rather. Managers in the chain of command have authority to do their job of coordinating and overseeing the work of others, and authority can be delegated downward to lower level managers, giving them certain rights while also prescribing certain limits within which to operate. And line of authority entitles a manager to direct the work of an employee. It is the employer-employee authority relationship that extends from the top of the organization to the lowest echelon. Now, according to the chain of command, as shown in Exhibit 11-4, as a link in the chain of command, a manager with a line authority has the right to direct the work of employees and to make certain decisions without consulting anyone. Now, as organizations get larger and more complex, line managers find that they do not have the time, expertise, or resources to get their jobs done effectively. Now, in response, they create staff authority functions to support, assist, advise, and generally reduce some of the informal informational burdens. For instance, a hospital administrator who cannot effectively handle the purchasing of all the supplies the hospital needs will create a purchasing department, which is a staff function. So again, when it comes down to authority, you have the line of authority extending from the upper organizational levels to the lowest levels, which clarifies who reports to whom. The line authority is the authority that entitles a manager to direct the work of an employee. And then you have the staff authority, and that's positions with some authority that have been created to support, assist, and advise those holding line authority. Now, responsibility is the obligation or expectation to perform any assigned duties. And then you have unity of command, and that's the management principle that each person should report to only one manager. Okay, you're going to want to remember this. Now, the traditional view was that managers could not and should not directly supervise more than 5 or 6 subordinates. And determining the span of control is, hold on one second, hold this thought 1 second. Now, when managers use their authority, I should say, to assign work to employees, those employees take on an obligation to perform those assigned duties. Now, this obligation or expectation to perform is known as responsibility. Now, any employee should be held accountable for their performance, and assigning work authority without responsibility and accountability can create opportunities for abuse. Now, likewise, no one should be held responsible or accountable for work tasks over which he or she has no authority to complete. Now, finally, the unity of command principle, one of Fayol's 14 management principles you see in your text, states that a person should report to only one manager. Now, without unity of command, conflicting demands from multiple bosses may create problems. Now, moving on to span of control. I started getting ahead of myself with the last slide. The span of control is the number of employees a manager can efficiently and effectively manage. Now, the traditional view was that managers could not and should not directly supervise more than 5 or 6 subordinates. Now, determining the span of control is important because, to a large degree, it determines the number of levels and managers in an organization. And that's an important consideration in how efficient an organization will be. Now, the contemporary view of span of control recognizes that there is no magic number. Many factors influence the number of employees a manager can efficiently and effectively manage. And the trend in recent years has been toward larger spans of control, which is consistent with managers' efforts to speed up decision making, increase flexibility, get closer to the customers, empower employees, and reduce the costs. Now, managers are beginning to recognize that they can handle a wider span when employees know their jobs well and when those employees understand organizational processes. Now, assume two organizations both have approximately 4,100 employees, as Exhibit 11-4 shows. Now, if one organization has a span of 4 and the other one has a span of 8, the organization with the wider span will have fewer levels and approximately 800 fewer managers. Now, at an average manager salary of $62,000 a year, the organization with a wider span would save over $49 million a year. Okay? Now, obviously, wider spans are more efficient in terms of cost. However, at some point, wider spans may reduce effectiveness if the employee performance worsens because the managers no longer have the time to lead effectively. Now, so it could take the quality out of the performance with a little bit less direction and leadership. So, moving on to centralization and decentralization. Remember that centralization is the degree to which decision-making is concentrated at upper levels of the organization. And then remember that decentralization is the degree to which lower-level employees provide input or actually make decisions. Now, if top managers make key decisions with little input from below, then the organization is more centralized. Now, on the other hand, the more that the lower-level employees provide input or actually make decisions, the more decentralization there is. Now, keep in mind that centralization and decentralization, it's not an either-or concept, okay? So the decision is relative, not absolute. That is, an organization is never completely centralized or decentralized. It's important to note that. Now, Exhibit 11-5 lists some of the factors excuse me, that affect an organization's use of centralization or decentralization. So, the factors that are associated with more centralization. Your environment is stable, right? Where in a decentralization, you're going to have an environment is complex and uncertain. In centralization, the lower level managers are not as capable or experienced at making decisions as upper managers, where decentralization, lower level managers are very capable and experienced at making decisions. And that kind of corresponds with, what was right above it. They're used to that complexity, uncertainty, ambiguity. They face a little bit more turbulence in their change day in and day out. So there's a little bit more empowerment associated, and these managers have had to make decisions and be able to think on their feet. So back over to centralization. You have the lower level managers do not want a say in decisions, where decentralization, lower level managers want a voice in the decisions. There's a lot more empowerment. In centralization, decisions are relatively minor. In decentralization, decisions are significant. Like I said, these are the ones who are dealing with complexities. In centralization, you have organization is facing a crisis or the risk of company failure. Okay, where decentralization is corporate culture is open to allowing managers a say in what happens. More fostering of shared leadership and diversity there. And then in centralization, you have a company is large. In decentralization is company could be geographically dispersed. You see that in a lot of IT companies. Centralization, effective implementation of company strategies depends on what on managers retaining say over what happens, where decentralization, effective implementation of company strategy depends on managers having involvement and flexibility to make the decisions. That's where the agility and innovation come into play. And then you'll notice more employee empowerment as well. Okay, speaking of employee empowerment, it's giving employees more authority or power to make decisions. So as organizations have become more flexible and responsive to environmental trends, there's been a distinct shift towards decentralization decision making. Now this trend, also known as employee empowerment, gives employees more authority or power to make decisions. Now we'll address this concept more thoroughly in our discussion of leadership in Chapter 17. Now in large companies especially, lower level managers are closer to the action and typically have more detailed knowledge about problems and how to best solve than top management. So empowerment's extremely important for organizational success. There's also motivating factors back to the empowerment that are associated and connected with empowerment because it fosters trust. So think about organizational psychology and the fact that an organization that the top management trusts you enough to empower you to make decisions, you'll be a little bit more motivated as a result of that, because you'll feel that fostered trust and the fact that they are confident in your skills and abilities and knowledge to make things happen for them. So formalization is how standardized an organization's jobs are and the extent to which employee behavior is guided by rules and procedures. So in highly formalized organizations, there's an explicit job description, numerous organizational rules, and clearly defined procedures covering work processes. Now, employees have little discretion over what's done, when it's done, and how it's done. However, where there is less formalization, employees have more discretion in how they do their work. Now, although formalization is necessary for consistency and control, many organizations today rely less on strict rules and standardization to guide and regulate employee behavior. Now, we get into the mechanistic and organic structures. Talked a lot about mechanistic structure in organizations when we went over organizational culture. So this is kind of a revisit for us, but remember that a mechanistic organization is an organizational design that's rigid and tightly controlled. And then the organic organization is an organizational design that's highly adaptive and flexible. Now, while the organic organization sounds a little bit more ideal for you because there's like more fostered trust, empowerment, maybe fosters a little bit more innovation, creativity, and maybe diversity, that mechanistic cultures and structures, they tend to correspond with the organization's mission, vision, its purpose. So that's why like the military is very rigid. You can't have such like a loose hold on the empowerment to where the high-ranking officers aren't the ones, where the buck stops with, and where they're not making decisions, especially with the importance of mission, allocating resources and personnel to accomplish missions. They have to be in the know because they work at the strategic level, where most of the subordinate officers and enlisted work at the operational level. So you have different levels of management and leadership present. So they require a mechanistic culture. The mechanistic culture was a natural result of combining the 6 elements of structure. Now, adhering to the chain of command principle, ensure the existence of a formal hierarchy of authority, and with each person controlled and supervised by one superior. Now, keeping the span of control small at increasingly high levels in the organization created tall, impersonal structures. Now, as the distance between the top and the bottom of the organization expanded, top management would increasingly impose rules and regulations. Now, because top managers couldn't control lower level activities through direct observation and ensure the use of standard practices, they substituted rules with rules and regulations. Now, the organic organization, on the other hand, is a highly adaptive form that is loose and flexible in comparison to the mechanistic organization, which is rigid and stable. Now, rather than having standardized jobs and regulations, the organic organization's loose structure allows it to change rapidly as required. Now, it has a division of labor, but the jobs people do are not standardized. And employees tend to be professionals who are technically proficient and trained to handle diverse problems. That's why I said earlier that they're more associated with like IT companies. This tends to be very popular with IT companies. So they need few formal rules and little direct supervision because their training has instilled in them the standards of professional conduct. So basic organizational design revolves around two organizational forms as described here in 11-6, and we just kind of went over it. That's mechanistic and organic. So with mechanistic, it's highly specialized, rigid departmentalization, clear chain of command, narrow spans of control, centralization, and high formalization. Sounds like the military, right? So organic, cross-functional teams, cross-hierarchical teams, free flow of information, wide spans of control, and decentralization and low formalization. So, strategy and structure. An organization's structure should facilitate goal achievement. Now, because goals are an important part of the organization's strategy, it's only logical that strategy and structure are closely linked. Now, research has shown that certain structural designs work best with different organizational strategies. Now, for instance, the flexibility and free-flowing information of the organic structure works well when an organization is pursuing meaningful and unique innovations. Now, the mechanistic organization, with its efficiency, stability, and tight controls, works best for companies wanting to tightly control costs. Now, large organizations, typically considered to be those with more than 2,000 employees, they tend to have more specialization, departmentalization, centralization, and rules and regulations than do small organizations. So, however, once an organization grows past a certain size has less influence on structure. Now, why is that? It's essentially like because once there are around 2,000 employees, it's already fairly mechanistic at that point. Now, adding another 500 employees won't impact the structure much. Now, on the other hand, adding 500 employees to an organization with only 300 employees is likely to make it more mechanistic. So, there's a considerable evidence that an organization's size affects the structure, but once an organization grows past a certain size has less influence on the structure. So, technology and structure. Remember that unit production is the production of items in units or small batches. Mass production is the production of items in large batches. And then process production is the production of items in continuous processes. So, every organization uses some form of technology to convert its inputs into outputs. So the initial research on technology's effect on structure can be traced to Joan Woodward, who studied small manufacturing firms in southern England to determine the extent to which structural design elements were related to organizational success. Now, she couldn't find any consistent pattern until she divided the firms into 3 distinct technologies that had increasing levels of complexity and sophistication. Now, the first category was unit production, and it described the production of items in units or small batches. Now, the second category was mass production, and that described the large batch manufacturing. And finally, the third and most technically complex group was process production, and it included continuous process production. And a summary of her findings is shown right here in Exhibit 11-7, and it's a summary of Woodward's findings that we just spoke of. But I'll leave them up here for a few. We're going to move on. Okay, so environmental uncertainty and structure. So in stable and simple environments, mechanistic designs can be more effective. The greater the uncertainty, the more an organization needs the flexibility of an organic design. And then I think that was very illustrative in last chapter when we went over strategies and organizational strategic flexibility. And we introduced the volatility, the uncertainty, complexities, and ambiguities, the need for that type of flexibility. Organizations need to be agile when they're organizations that commonly face those complexities. Now, some organizations face very stable and simple environments with little uncertainty. Now, the ones who face dynamic and complex environments with a lot of uncertainty are the ones that we're talking about here. Managers try to minimize environmental uncertainty by adjusting the organization structure. Now, the evidence on the environment-structure relationship helps explain why so many managers today are restructuring their organizations to be lean, fast, and flexible. That's that agility we were talking about. Now, worldwide economic downturns, global competition, that we introduced that in class, accelerated product innovation by competitors, and increased demands from customers for high quality and faster deliveries are examples of dynamic environmental forces. Right? So mechanistic cultures or mechanistic organizations are not equipped to respond to rapid environmental change and environmental uncertainty. So as a result, we're seeing organizations become more organic. So traditional organizational design options. You have the simple structure. That's an organizational design with little departmentalization, wide spans of control, centralized authority, and little formalization. Then you have the functional structure, and that's an organizational design that groups together similar or related occupational specialties. And then you have the divisional structure, and that's an organizational structure made up of separate semi-autonomous units or divisions. So most companies start as entrepreneurial ventures using a simple structure, an organizational design with low departmentalization, wide spans of control, authority centralized in a single person, and little formalization. As employees are added, however, most don't remain as simple structures, so they can change, they can evolve. The structure tends to be more specialized and formalized. And then a functional structure is an organizational design that groups similar or related occupational specialties together. So you can think of this structure as a functional departmentalization applied to the entire organization. And then the divisional structure is an organizational structure made up of separate business units or divisions. Now, in this structure, each division has limited autonomy with a division manager who has authority over his or her unit and is responsible for an external overseer to coordinate and control the various divisions, and often provides support services such as financial and legal. So when designing a structure, managers may choose one of the traditional organizational designs, and these structures tend to be more mechanistic in nature. And a summary of the strengths and weaknesses of each type of organizational design can be found right here in Exhibit 11-8. So team structures. Team structure is an organizational structure in which the entire organization is made up of work teams. So sometimes this, you'll also hear the word projectized too, culture. So in this structure, employee empowerment is crucial because no line of managerial authority flows from top to bottom. Rather, the employee teams design and do work in the way they think is best, but the teams are also held responsible for all work performance results in their respective areas. So the matrix structure is an organizational structure that assigns specialists from different functional departments to work on one or more projects. And then you have the project structure, and that's an organizational structure in which employees continuously work on projects, very much like the team structure. So other popular contemporary designs, these are being the matrix and the project structure. So remember, the matrix structure assigns specialists from different functional departments to work on projects led by a project manager. And one unique aspect of this design is that it creates a dual chain of command because employees in the matrix organization have two managers, their functional area manager and their product or project manager, who share authority. And many organizations use a project structure, like we said earlier, in which employees continuously work on projects. Unlike the matrix structure, a project structure has no formal departments where employees return at the completion of the project. Instead, employees take their specific skills, abilities, and experiences to other projects. So it's like one project after another. Okay, and Exhibit 11-9 shows an example of a matrix organization. Just notice all the functional areas it's broken down. Now, although the idea of eliminating boundaries may seem old, many of today's most successful organizations find that they can operate most effectively by remaining flexible and unstructured, so that the ideal structure for them is not having a rigid, bounded, or predefined structure. Now, the type of work virtual interns typically involves researching, sales, marketing, and social media development. That's the type of work. Tasks that can be done anywhere with a computer and online access. So some organizations are structured in a way that allows most employees to be virtual employees. Now, that's the boundaryless organization, and that's an organization whose design is not defined by or limited to the horizontal, vertical, or external boundaries imposed by predefined structures. And then again, the virtual organization. It's an organization that consists of a small core of full-time employees and outside specialists temporarily hired as needed to work on projects. So another structural option organizations might use is a task force. Okay, it's also called an ad hoc committee. And that's a temporary committee or team formed to tackle a specific short-term problem affecting several departments. The temporary nature of a task force is what differentiates it from a cross-functional team. And the days may be numbered when businesses generate their own product development ideas and develop, manufacture, market, and deliver those products to customers. Now, today, many companies are trying to open innovation, opening up the search for new ideas beyond the organization's boundaries and allowing innovations to easily transfer inward and outward. So that open innovation, opening up the search for new ideas beyond the organization's boundaries and allowing innovations to easily transfer inward and outward. So Exhibit 11-10 describes some of the benefits and drawbacks of open innovation. Telecommuting, a work arrangement in which employees work at home and are linked to the workplace by a computer. So, information technology has made telecommuting possible, and external environmental changes have made it necessary for many organizations. So, working from home used to be considered a cushy perk for a few lucky employees, and such an arrangement wasn't allowed very often. Now, many businesses view telecommuting as a business necessity. Now, despite its apparent appeal, many managers are reluctant to have their employees become laptop hobos. That's what they're called. Employees often express the same concerns about working remotely, especially when it comes to the isolation of not being at work. So, compressed work weeks, flex time, and job sharing. So a compressed work week, that's a work week where employees work longer hours per day, but fewer days per week. For example, in my line of work, I work 4/10. So I work Tuesday through Friday, 10-hour days instead of 5/8, which would be the normal work week, Monday to Friday, 8 to 4:30. So, with that extra half hour being the lunch hour, half hour. But then you have flex time or flexible work hours, and that's a scheduling system in which employees are required to work a specific number of hours a week, but are free to vary those hours within certain limits. And then you have job sharing, and that's the practice of having two or more people split a full-time job. So organizations may sometimes and they need to restructure work using these forms of flexible work arrangements. So we're going to move on to the contingent workforce, and that's contingent workers are temporary, freelance, or contract workers whose employment is contingent on demand for their services. A lot of government contractors fall in this category. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, contingent workers are persons who do not expect their jobs to last, or who reported that their jobs are temporary. Also, they do not have an implicit or explicit contract for ongoing employment. Alternative employment arrangements include persons employed as independent contractors, on-call workers, temporary help agencies, workers, and workers provided by contract firms. Now, one of the main issues businesses face with their contingent workers, especially those who are independent contractors or freelancers, is classifying who actually qualifies as one. So the decision on who is and who isn't an independent contractor isn't as easy or as unimportant as it may seem. So companies don't have to pay Social Security, Medicare, or unemployment insurance taxes on workers classified as independent contractors. And those individuals also are covered by most workplace laws. So It's an important decision and a very important topic for organizations. So, now, in review of our first learning objective, work specialization is dividing work activities into separate job tasks. Today's view is that work specialization can help employees be more efficient. Departmentalization is how jobs are grouped together. Today, most large organizations use combinations and different forms of departmentalization. And the chain of command and its use combinations of different forms of the chain of command and its companion concepts being authority, responsibility, and unity of command were viewed as important ways of maintaining control in organizations. Now, the contemporary view is that they are less relevant in today's organizations. The traditional view of span of control was that managers should directly supervise no more than 5 to 6 individuals. Now, the contemporary view is that the span of control depends on the skills and abilities of the manager and the employees and on the characteristics of the situation. So, centralization, decentralization is a structured decision about who makes the decisions, upper level managers or lower level employees. And formalization concerns the organization's use of standardization and strict rules to provide consistency and control. Now, today's organizations rely less on strict rules and standardization to guide and regulate employee behavior. Remember, there's a lot more empowerment now. So, in review of our second learning objective, a mechanistic organization is a rigid and tightly controlled structure. An organic organization is highly adaptive and flexible. And in review of our third learning objective, if the strategy changes, the structure also should change. An organization's size can affect its structure up to a certain point. Once an organization reaches a certain size, usually around 2,000 employees, it's fairly mechanistic. An organization's technology can affect its structure. And also know that an organization's structure is most effective with unit production and process production technology. A mechanistic structure is most effective with mass production technology. So I'm going to say that again. An organic structure is most effective with unit production and process production technology, and a mechanistic structure is most effective with mass production technology. Now, the more uncertain an organization's environment, the more it needs the flexibility of an organic design. Now, in review of our fourth learning objective, a simple structure is one with little departmentalization, wide spans of control, authority centralized in a single person, and little formalization. And a functional structure groups similar or related occupational specialties together. And a divisional structure is made up of separate business units or divisions. In review of our fifth learning objective, in a team structure, the entire organization is made up of work teams. The matrix structure assigns specialists from different functional departments to work on one or more projects being led by a project manager. And then a project structure is one in which employees continuously work on projects. And then also remember that a boundary-less organization's design is not defined by or limited by the horizontal, vertical, or external boundaries imposed by a predefined structure. And then a virtual organization consists of a small core of full-time employees and outside specialists temporarily hired as needed to work on projects. Now, another structural option is a task force, which is a temporary committee or team formed to tackle a specific short-term problem affecting several departments. Also, remember that telecommuting is a work arrangement in which employees work at home and are linked to the workplace by a computer, and that a compressed work week is one in which employees work longer hours per day but fewer days per week. Remember that flex time is a scheduling system in which employees are required to work a specific number of hours in a week but are free to vary those hours within certain limits. And then also remember, job sharing is when 2 or more people split a full-time job. Okay. Now, contingent workers are temporary, freelance, or contract workers whose employment is contingent on demands for their services. Then remember that organizing issues include classifying who actually qualifies as an independent contractor, setting up a process for recruiting, screening, and placing contingent workers, and having a method in place for establishing goals, schedules, and deadlines, and for monitoring work performance. Those are all issues associated with the contingent workers. So, thank you for your participation in the Chapter 11 lecture. Stay tuned for the Chapter 12 lecture. Until then, check Blackboard for the week's activities and assignments.